talk. And so I'm going to put some effort into getting this talk done in the 50 minutes that I have allowed. And I think everybody has this image of a long time ago in the 60s, people were dreaming about personal computing. The idea of the Dynabook was actually catalyzed by Seymour Papert. And I thought of the Dynabook not as I'm not using it, not as a piece of technology, but as a kind of a service, in the same way that I think of printed books as primarily giving us a service rather than some interesting arrangement of atoms into something that we can carry around. And this has been the most misunderstood thing about the Dynabook. People love that it's looking more and more like what people are marketing people and vendors are trying to do today. But it wasn't a big feat to think it up in 1968 because Moore's Law was already articulated in 1965, and what it really required was a vision of what it could be good for. And it was the way Seymour Papert thought about powerful ideas in education that translated very powerfully to me and got me to think about computers for the first time as being the next 500-year invention after the printing press. And it's in that context that I'm going to give this talk today. So I want to talk about stuff that is important. And the other thing that you have to realize is that the Dynabook was a very, very good 10-year prediction. That was I was not trying to predict today or even the range of Moore's Law, which was originally out to 1995. I was trying to predict something that could be made within 10 years if people really paid attention to it. And the way it worked out at Xerox PARC is we were able to do a fair amount of the software and the user interface for it, and we were able to build a computer that could run it, but Xerox was not interested in doing the flat screen display and the hyper integration of silicon that could have been done to make it happen by the end of the 70s. So, and I think this is the first idea here is that good ideas are submitted to the low-pass filter of the outside world. And so a good idea that's good enough to actually happen is usually delayed by 20, 30, or 40 years. So there are many, many good things that were done in the 60s and the 70s that are not out yet because people are much more interested in ideas that are familiar to them rather than having to learn ideas that aren't. So when we talk about technology, we've got this, I don't know whether Karen Cater is here. Yeah, she's at the Department of Education now, but she was at Apple. And the old Apple motto back in the ideological days of the Macintosh was the Mac was supposed to be wheels for the mind, and not just wheels for the mind, but wheels like a bike rather than an automobile. So the great thing about a bike is that it doesn't wither your physical attributes to use it. It takes everything you've got and it amplifies that. Whereas an automobile puts you in a position where you have to decide to exercise. And we're bad at that because nature never required us to have to decide to exercise. There were always saber-toothed tigers chasing us around or us chasing them to get us to exercise. So the idea was to try and make an amplifier, not a prosthetic. Put a prosthetic on a healthy limb and it withers. And so what we thought we were doing was making something like a new kind of microscope to reveal other kinds of things that were invisible, or a new kind of book to do what books did to humanity. And books didn't just bring knowledge to us, the learning to become fluent readers of books changed the way we think. And this is lost on many people who think that you can transcode the kind of information that's put into books into television and wind up with the same experience and the same mental state, and the answer is that's absolutely untrue. The information environment that we're in and what we have to become in order to use different kinds of symbol systems is absolutely critical. So that's what we thought we were doing. But Arthur C. Clarke, the science fiction writer, is famous for 3 laws. And the third one is any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So what we were actually doing was putting out into the world magic. Because even people who are in computing did not believe in personal computers back then. That was why it was so much fun at Xerox PARC. We actually had no interference of any kind. We didn't even have competitors. Nobody was doing it except us. And so this conception of what this service might be like came out of kind of these pure ideas. But the other way to think about it is, wow, if something is magic, it's something that has happened without us being able to see what the causes are. And in fact, if you take that brass microscope and give it to a monkey, the monkey will even miss what the actual magic of the microscope is, but will go for the obvious magic. And the obvious magic of a microscope to a monkey is it can see its face in it. And I want to put this out to you as not just an analogy of a monkey and a microscope, but of humanity and technology. When we don't know what else to do with technology, we try and find ourselves within it. And that, by and large, is what has happened to personal computing since it came out commercially in the early 1980s. It has basically became a vast narcissistic mirror for the largest proportion of users. So worse than almost any other thing we could have invented, we invented a new way for people to admire themselves and to ignore almost anything of consequence. And similar things can be applied to books. So this is my analogy. Actually, it'd be great if we lowered the lights just a little bit. Yeah. So the computer literacy, quote unquote, as used in schools always reminded me of this, that the purpose of computer literacy classes in schools was to get the chimp to hold the book upright and to turn the pages from front to back, and the idea of turn it on, be able to put the disk pack in, be able to double click on some icon and get your word processor and so forth. All of which misses completely what the computer is about, just as the chimp here is missing completely about what the book is about. Chimp is going after what's obviously fun about the book. Wow, it's tactile. Through all of these things I can do this too, and I can imitate people who feed me doing this stuff. And my old friend, sadly departed, I miss him every day, Neil Postman, wrote this great book in 1984, so about 25 years ago, called Amusing Ourselves to Death, and he would love that I'm giving this talk in Las Vegas. This book is actually mostly about television and the environment it creates for people's minds. But if we were to write this book today, Neil would actually call it Distracting Ourselves to Death. This is the larger problem. There's just zillions of stuff out there that are tuned to attract our nervous systems. And perhaps the best metaphor for this talk is Guitar Hero. And I like to use this metaphor because I used to be a professional jazz guitar player. And so Guitar Hero is probably the most insidious example, but it's also easy to talk about because these people are not playing the guitar. They're not learning to play the guitar. They're not doing anything that is remotely like playing the guitar. They're enjoying a fantasy, technology-assisted, of being a guitar player. And this, when I look at schools' use of computers, this is what I see. I see essentially what I call social tokens. Computers in schools because parents now think that their kids will fail in life if they aren't familiar with them and they can't do the X, Y, and Z on them. But in fact, it's all Guitar Hero. With a few exceptions, over 40 years, I've never seen a really interesting use of a computer for what it is in a school.